Good morning. Welcome to the Joint Subcommittee on General Government. We have several budgets to look at this morning. We've got Housing Division, Housing Inspection and Compliance, Taxicab Authority, the Labor Commissioner, Division of Financial Institutions, and Division of Mortgage Lending. Committee Secretary, could you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Gorla.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Hodeggy.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt. Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Chair Brooks.
Here. All right, well, welcome this morning. I would just like to remind the members, please mute yourself when you're not asking a question. We're going to have, if you would like to get recognized for a question, please raise your hands or interrupt me. My Teams is not functioning this morning. And I also would like to remind the general public that is calling in to comment at end of the meeting today. Our last agenda item will be public comment. You can find login information and call-in information on the agenda that was posted for today's meeting, where you go to the Nellis website or the legislative website, to the Nellis tab, and there's a banner at the top that allows you to log in and also gives you instructions on how to call in. All right, we will start this morning with a team from Business and Industry, and we will hear all six of the departments, and let's kick it off with Director Reynolds, and then each team can present as Director Reynolds sees fit with the Housing Division today. Director Reynolds.
Great. Chair Brooks and members of the committee, thank you very much. Good morning. Today, we're going to go over 5 of our agency budgets. 4 of those budgets are fee-based, and 1 is a general fund budget. So we have fee-based financial institutions, mortgage lending, Taxicab Authority, and housing. And then Labor Commissioner is a general fund budget. Next slide, please. Lisa, going on to the next slide.
Director Reynolds, I'll be stopping after each individual budget to ask questions before we move to the next budget, okay?
Excellent, thank you. So going through this, I wanted to give an introductory statement to tell you and the committee members how proud I am of really particularly these 5 agencies within the Department of Business and Industry. In the last year, these agencies have really maintained constant contact with their industries that they regulate. They switched to the technology to hold virtual meetings with the entities that they regulate, the consumers, but also they were working from various locations out of their house, some at their office, but they were able to maintain continuity and work with the different entities. For example, the Labor Commissioner basically conducted over 40 meetings with chambers, with employee association organizations, with businesses that had questions about labor issues. Housing was working with a team of individuals from the Nevada Supreme Court, Legal Aid, and our Home Means Nevada group to help out with funding for emergency housing, rental eviction issues, foreclosures, everything that came as a result of the pandemic over the last few years. The FID really worked with the PPP loans, PETS grants, in terms of making sure that banks were up to speed in terms of what was happening on a national level, and also translating that into the local level where businesses would apply for those grants, and getting different financial institutions used to what they need to do to access those funds to get them out to the different businesses. Mortgage lending. This was really a banner year for mortgages, house mortgages out there, but also they kept in contact with what was happening on a national level in terms of foreclosures, extending loans and extending time periods on foreclosures so that people could keep their homes. So all of these entities worked very, very hard to keep in contact with their industries, to serve the public and make sure that their industry was alive and well and still serving the public. So with that, I want to turn it over to our first budget, which is Steve Acroft, who will go over housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Good morning, Chair Brooks and members of the committee. For the record, Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division. With me today also is Michael Holliday, our Chief Financial Officer. At the Nevada Housing Division, our mission is to improve lives, strengthen Nevada communities by expanding housing opportunities, building self-sufficiency, protecting the residents and industry of manufactured housing, and fostering economic development. We do this through about a half a dozen different activities, including administering home ownership programs, financing for multifamily affordable rental properties, distributing funding for weatherization and other federal programs, having oversight of manufactured housing, and collecting data to drive those decisions. This has resulted in over 3,300 Nevada families assisted with homeownership over the past year, including our special programs for teachers and veterans, the creation and preservation of approximately 1,700 affordable apartments in the past biennium, and the administration of over $13 million in grant funding for the advancement of affordability for low and moderate income Nevadans. Next slide, please. The division only has a couple of budgetary initiatives, and the primary opportunities presented here relate to a reduction in the request of cost issuance authority, E225, and the position and program realignment within the budget account, which have no increase in budget authority. Most of these position realignments indicated here in 3841 have a reciprocal effect with the realignments in budget 3845. And with the chair's permission, I'd like to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Michael Holliday, to talk through the enhancements.
Good morning, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. Michael Holliday, Chief Financial Officer for the Nevada Housing Division. It's my pleasure today to walk you through the enhancement units the division has requested for budget account 3841. The first one, E225, the cost of issuance alignment. This is an annual biennial adjustment that we make that reflects the forecast for bond issuance for the upcoming biennium. And I would say that for both FY 22 and 23, it's a little bit lower than it has been in the past. We're trying to be a little more accurate with our forecast there. And as you may or may not know, when we put the budget together, the federal legislation setting a fixed 4% floor for tax-exempt bond finance multifamily had not passed at that point. So in theory, we're hoping that we actually have more affordable housing production in the multifamily tax-exempt bond program going forward. It would be a good thing to have to go before IFC and say we have created more affordable housing and have to ask for more authority. But that's what's happening in 225. E710 is the standard EATS replacement equipment schedule. In this budget account, that's 5 PCs in the first year, 1 server, and 2 switches in year 2. So kind of standard stuff that have hit the EATS required or recommended replacement schedule. The bigger enhancement this year, an opportunity, as Administrator Acroft had mentioned, is that we'd like to realign some positions into budget accounts. And then overall, this will have no change on the budget authority the division is asking for in any budget account as far as an overall perspective. What it will do, though, is provide a more standard, typical cost accounting structure where you have a centralized hub of indirect expenses that you then allocate out to direct programs. And it would leave us with budget accounts that have direct personnel only, except for budget account 3841, where we would then consolidate all of our indirect cost expenses here. What this will do is it'll provide a clear path for auditors. So if you're auditing a federal program in budget account 3838, all of that direct payroll is now going to be in budget account 3838. And then you can trace back the indirect expenses to one place, to budget account 3841. It will also, as I mentioned, end up providing a really clear picture of what the division's programmatic business functions do. So you'll have budget account 4865, strictly weatherization direct expense. Budget account 38, strictly federal and state grant programs for housing. Budget account 3845, strictly inspection and compliance. And then you'd have budget account 3841, the one that's before you now, would be all the indirect expenses and the bond program for the divisions, your typical state housing finance agency activities. And then you would allocate those indirect costs out to the direct functions. To walk through the changes there, so E900 would move the division's administrative staff. These are the more widely dispersed support functions of the agency. These are folks that they currently are in budget account 3845, which is housing inspection and compliance. They don't work on that. They do administrative support for the entire division. So we'll move them to 38. We propose moving them to 3841, and then can allocate their time out. Same thing with the IT professional 3. He provides all of the IT support for the entire agency. So he's an indirect cost for everybody. So we'd move him to 3841 as well. E901 is the affordable housing advocate, currently residing in budget account 3845 as well. We'd like to move Ms. Worthy to 3841 because she, again, provides constituent support for all of the division's programs, and so she is not a direct cost to any program, but more an indirect cost for the agency as a whole. Put that position in 3841 and then allocate out ratably based on the time that she spends on the various direct programs. E902 is the home program and 2 grants and projects analysts, which currently are the only federal grant program in budget account 3841. All of the other federal and state housing related programs are in budget account 3838. So we'd like to move that program over with 3838. And then you would end up having all direct expenses there working on federal and state grant programs. The last enhancement unit in this budget account is E903, which is to split a portion of our membership dues for the National Council of State Housing Agencies from 3841, a portion of it, roughly 25%, over to budget account 3845. That's being done because when we did the merger with manufactured housing in the 17th session, the compliance function of low-income housing tax credits is actually over there with housing inspection and compliance, which makes sense. But they benefit greatly from our membership in the Nevada National Council of State Housing Agencies because they have a robust forum of best practices and policies. They have a discussion amongst peers that are in that kind of federal low-income housing tax credit compliance. And I will say that the pandemic has been, unfortunately, a good reminder of what we use this agency for. These folks that work in 3845 tax credit compliance actually usually go in and do physical inspections of all the tax credit properties. Of course, because of the pandemic, they had to figure out what to do. And the forum provided by the NCSHA actually allowed our team to interact with their peers across the country to figure out what those best practices would be, and also to stay up with legislation and provide a voice to federal regulators to kind of discuss the options that we could do for continuing to do inspections or not doing inspections or the timing of such. So this just allocates a portion over to a function that actually benefits from that membership. And with that, that's the overview of the enhancement units requested in budget account 3841.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. That was a good description of the realignment and how and the why. Appreciate that. Any members? I believe Senator or Assemblywoman Peters has a question on one of these decision units, and Senator Assemblywoman Peters, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, and the first one has to do with the federal grant for the home program and our 25% match at the state. And can you just explain or describe what you guys are how you guys are going to create that match?
Assemblywoman Peters, through Chair Brooks to you. This is Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Nevada Housing Division. So the state created the what used to be called the Low Income Housing Trust Fund, which is now called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That receives a portion of the real property transfer tax, and that goes into actually budget account 38. That is designed 100% originally to be the match for home. So it behaves, it has the same guidance as home, it mimics home for all intents and purposes. And our request would actually align home into the same budget account as the trust funds. So would also provide a little clarity in that standpoint. And we pass those trust funds on to jurisdictions that receive home funds as well, so that it can be the match for the federal requirement.
Thank you for the clarification. That I believe that federal program does offer additional matches through non-monetary means, and I would just be curious if we have those kinds of matches as well. If you want to work with staff on leveraging those non-monetary match. And I have a couple follow-ups, if I may, on the staff movement. Can you talk about the workload requirements of the home program, which currently have the 2 grant analyst positions, and compare that to the low-income housing budget workload requirements?
So workload requirements as far as, for the record, Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division. So the workload requirements for home, are you comparing it to the Affordable Housing Trust Funds or just the other grant programs in general, just for a little clarification there?
Absolutely. I'm looking at the 2 grant analyst positions, which are currently supporting the home program. Can you talk about the difference between the workload requirements for the home program versus the account for low-income housing program?
Yeah, you bet. Again, for the record, Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division. The home grant project analysts also work on the other programs. We actually have a total of 3 GPAs, grant project analysts, for all of our federal and state grant programs. So basically, what was happening currently is we'd have to take a portion of their time and allocate it over to 3838 to cover the Affordable Housing Trust Funds, Section 811, National Housing Trust Funds, and other funding sources that are in 3838. So by moving these 2 positions over, those will all be direct. We can actually use all 3 grants and projects analysts now and probably more directly allocate their time amongst all of the federal and state grant programs.
Thank you for that clarification. So just to be clear for the record, so those 2 grant and project analyst positions would then provide support for other programs under this transfer.
Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division, for the record. That's absolutely correct.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Thank you, Mr. Holiday. Any other members have any questions on this budget? I do not see any members looking to ask a question, so we could move on to the next budget, please.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Next, we'll have Scott Whittemore, the administrator for the Taxicab Authority, present his budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Good morning, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Scott Whittemore, and I'm the administrator of the Taxicab Authority. This is my 3rd session with the state, my 2nd in this role. But as it is my last week with the state before I'm transitioning to the private sector.
Excuse me, Mr. Whittemore, if I may interrupt. Mr. Reynolds, were we gonna, in your presentation and in our notes, we had the housing inspection and compliance budget. Were we going to come back to that?
We really probably should cover that now too. So I didn't go through that. So I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem. We'll come back to you, Mr. Whittemore.
Sorry about that.
Good morning again. This is Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division. Budget account 3845 Housing Inspection and Compliance has basically two decision units, enhancement units. E710 is the standard EATS replacement for computers and software. In this account, it's 7 PCs in year 1 and 2 PCs in year 2. Pretty standard stuff there. And what you're seeing in E900, E901, and E903 are the reciprocal entries from what we discussed in budget account 3845. So it's moving the administrative folks and the IT professional from 3845 to 3841, moving the housing advocate from 3845 to 3841, and then moving a piece of our membership dues for the National Council of State Housing Agencies from 3841 to 3845.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. And I think that we have a question from Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I had a question regarding the Chief Housing Assistant position. With the transfer, how would the position duties and responsibilities change?
Good morning, Assemblywoman. Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division, for the record. Duties and responsibilities will not change at all. In fact, this solely is really a realignment of positions to kind of match up with whether they're an indirect or direct expense. But as far as the folks that they oversee or the day-to-day duties or responsibilities, there would be no change.
Thank you very much. And then also talking about more of the transition and transfer of positions, would the transfer of the 3 administrative positions to the Housing Division budget result in additional administrative duties being performed by the manufactured housing inspectors, investigators, and program management personnel as well?
Great question, Michael Holiday, for the record. Absolutely will not change their responsibility. In fact, if you're an employee, you wouldn't even know that you got moved, that your budget account got moved, except when you went to fill out your timesheet or something and you saw a different budget account code. But really, no operational changes to the division at all. This is really being an accounting nerd. This is an accounting cleanup to make things more traditional cost accounting structure.
Thank you for that clarification. And one more quick question, if I may, Chair Brooks.
Please.
Oh, then would the administrative assistant positions then also continue to cross-train in the various business processes within the division?
A great question, Michael Holiday, for the record. Yeah, they would. They would continue doing the same thing and providing support. So we basically have them in 3841 if you approve the budget as requested, and then they could allocate some of their time back to 3845 if they were cross-training on title support or something for manufactured housing or inspection and compliance or any budget account for that matter. It really gives us kind of a little more flexibility by having them in 3841. They could work anywhere within the division, and we can do one cost allocation outwards as opposed to having cross allocations.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it sounded like it'd give you a little bit more flexibility. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Senator Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about you're recommending a transfer of your IT professional. Is that going to change any of his duties? Or is that the same answer as the previous one, that they're not going to know and that you made a change?
Good morning, Senator Dennis. This is Michael Holiday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division. That's correct. No change. Still support the entire division. He would just be doing it from budget account 3841 instead of 3845.
Thank you. And how many? Do you only have one IT professional for the whole division?
One mighty IT professional. That's correct. But we do receive support from the Department of Business and Industry. They have IT staff that chip in to support us as well.
But you have offices in the north and the south, or just the north?
Michael Holiday, for the record, that's correct. North and south.
So is this one located in the north?
North, yeah.
And then you get help from business and industry in your south location?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And next up, I have Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair. My question was, I'm wondering about the recommended transfer of the housing advocate, affordable housing advocate position from this budget to the housing budget. And just wondering if that would have any impact on the activities or duties that are currently performed in that position?
Good morning, Assemblywoman Michael Holiday from the Housing Division, Chief Financial Officer. No changes in responsibilities or oversight. In fact, the Housing Advocate actually represents constituents amongst all of our programs, anything that comes into the division. So having that position in the central kind of indirect cost center makes sense, because then we can just allocate based on where she receives, Ms. Worthy receives requests from. We can actually send the time then more directly. So no change in oversight or duties at all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Notice a theme here, Mr. Holliday? Do any of the other members have any other questions on this budget account? Bear with me as I toggle through screens here. It does not appear as if we do. Thank you, Mr. Holliday. I think we can now move on to the next budget, which I believe is the Taxicab Authority.
So again, good morning, Chair Brooks, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Scott Whittemore, and I am the administrator of the Nevada Taxicab Authority. As I was just briefly saying, this is my last week with the state before transitioning to the private sector, so I did not want to miss an opportunity just to say thank you to you all for the many countless hours of work on behalf of all Nevadans. You all are tremendous public servants, and it's been my privilege and my honor to work with so many of you. So with that, I thank you this morning for the opportunity to present the Taxicab Authority budget. As Director Reynolds mentioned, the Nevada Taxicab Authority is 100% fee funded, so we receive no general funds. We are funded by the licensees which we regulate. So we oversee Clark County taxicab industry, and we are a law enforcement agency as defined by NRS, but we're really a regulatory public safety agency. And our three main functions are we permit every driver, so they go through a fingerprint, FBI fingerprint process, and a local background scope that we look at. Every vehicle is inspected annually at a minimum. Oftentimes they're inspected due to new meters or the change in any part of the vehicle, they'll be re-inspected. Our enforcement is routine patrol. We also do targeted investigations and then impounds, and I'll come back to that. The industry which we regulate, it's 3,530 medallions, 16 companies. This biennium, 6,000 active drivers. One thing we'll talk about is just the impact of COVID on taxi rides. So pre-COVID, 15.8 million, and then fiscal year 20, that dropped to 10 million just from the last 4 months of that fiscal year from the impact from COVID. Taxis remain an essential mode of frontline. Yes.
I apologize, committee, for the interruption. This is Sawyer Barnett with Broadcast and Production Services. Mr. Whittemore, it looks like we're not seeing the screens on the broadcast. Ms. Figueroa, will you go ahead and stop sharing the screens for 1 moment and then reshare? All right, please stand by for confirmation that we can see it. All right, and you are good to go. Once again, I apologize for the interruption.
Not a problem. Again, Scott Whittemore for the record, Nevada Taxicab Authority. So just a few quick points. Taxis remained an essential mode of frontline transportation. So through the governor's emergency declaration in March, taxis were considered an essential service, and they performed that role admirably. They did over 3 million rides from that March emergency declaration. You can imagine as tourists disappeared from the Las Vegas Strip, there were still many local rides that needed to be done, whether it's medical service trips, whether it's grocery store trips. Those drivers were on the front lines, and our staff was out. Both our enforcement staff and our vehicle inspection staff maintained that posture throughout the pandemic. I'm very proud of their efforts in that regard. Taxis remain one of the most efficient ways to move large sums of people. So after large shows, they can queue very quickly, and that's why they're able to move so many people so quickly. We do think that autonomous vehicles will be coming to the mass market of Las Vegas. I'm sure many of you have seen the articles about the autonomous vehicles already operating here. And as a result, I believe both taxis and rideshare will continue to use that mode of operation in the future. Unlawful passenger transportation is any time a ride is being given without a certificate. So whether it's a limo, a shuttle, a bus, a personal vehicle, this is happening in Las Vegas many times a night. It is something that my staff is very focused on. Since we instituted zones and basically eliminated the scourge of long hauling, which had been the focus of this agency for decades, what we have now shifted to is unlawful passenger transportation. I gave a presentation to Growth and Infrastructure and just discussed how often this is happening and how ugly it is and the potential risks. So this is something that this agency will be very focused on going forward. So again, just to look at the current status because of the COVID impact. So we started the fiscal year with a $4.5 million reserve, and that reserve was drawn down $2 million to our estimated year end of about $2.5 million. Again, these are estimates. We don't know what the rest of this year is going to look like, but just to give you an idea, in that far left column, fiscal year 2019, it was 15.8 million rides before COVID in fiscal year 20. If you look in that column, that middle column, in March is when the governor institutes the emergency declaration, and then you can see the trips fall off a cliff, April, May, June to finish that year out. And so we went from 15.8 million trips to about 10.2 million trips. The reason this is significant is the Taxicab Authority, one of its main sources of revenues is from a trip charge. And as those trips declined, so too obviously did our revenue. The issue going forward is, as you can see into fiscal year 21, we're still in a state of very reduced tourist activity. Having said that, we are hopeful, and I want to be very, very clear about my personal beliefs and what I think as a department we believe is going to happen, is Las Vegas is going to snap back. Southern Nevada and Nevada as a whole is going to snap back, but it's just a question of how fast those trips return. I am very confident going into fiscal year 22 that the picture is going to be tremendously better. But the issue becomes, can we get back to about 14 million trips, which is where the Taxicab Authority needs to be to have revenues match expenditures. So just as to our budget account, the enhancements before you all for 36 positions, what it really is reducing from 39 to 36. So we're eliminating one vacant public safety dispatcher, just to clarify here. This covered what's known as a graveyard shift. The Taxicab Authority is no longer operating after midnight. We just do not have the budget and staff to cover that breadth. So this position is no longer needed. We still have one supervisor in that role, plus 4 dispatchers to cover 6 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week. Our folks are out there. The vehicle inspector position, again, the workload just did not justify having this additional inspector. We still have 4 budgeted vehicle inspectors to do all of the annual inspections. We made a significant change to the way accidents are reported. Our vehicle inspectors were ping-ponging around the valley to every minor bumper tap. And what we did was we changed that reporting process. So again, the workload, it's just a gain in efficiency. We don't need this position, and it's vacant. E710 is just a standard replacement of our equipment. And then E711 is also IT related. It's just a server. And then as the director had discussed with this committee at the previous meeting, one IT professional is transferring to Department of Business and Industry, and all that does is give us the position will be down here in the South. We'll still have access to it. We'll still have the benefit of that position. It'll be cost allocated. So rather than us paying for a full-time IT professional, we get the work that we need and the department benefits. So with that, Chair, I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions. I know this budget tends to generate questions, so I'm available, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Whittemore. I have several questions, but before I get started, I just wanted to see if any of the other committee members have any questions on this budget. I see Senator Goicoechea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just kind of wondering, you're saying you're going to eliminate the graveyard shift, and you're also talking about the increase in these people that are offering the bogus rides. Do you think, in fact, they will recognize the fact that you don't have graveyard enforcement and prey on that?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And Chair, may I go direct? So Scott Whittemore, for the record, thank you, Senator. You raise a very good question. Both the TA and the Nevada Transportation Authority, which cover this area of unlawful passenger transportation, are constrained by our staff and our budgets. And the reality is, after midnight, there is a risk. There's no doubt about it. Do they know that we're not operating? I don't know that to be the case. We do shift enforcement from time to time, and we will go out on a targeted basis and run after midnight for that very reason. After about 3 a.m., the reality is the town has just become very, very quiet, even in Las Vegas. But sir, you point out a substantial risk, which is this is operating all hours of the day. It is something that both us and the NTA talk about, and we work together very closely. That's a great staff who's out there trying to track down these rides as well. So it's something that we'll continue to focus on. And from an enforcement standpoint, we just need to do a targeted effort after hours to make sure that they don't think after midnight, it's kind of free range.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And everybody knows that people behave better after midnight in Las Vegas. Any other members have any other questions on this? I see Senator Dennis.
Just a quick follow-up. On your E710, it looks like you're replacing most of your computer stuff in the first year. Is that right?
Yes. So the first annual is biennium amount, of the biennium is reflected there.
Okay. Yeah, because it looked like you had a lot in that first year, but not very much in the second year. So you probably replace all of them all at once. So okay,
thank you.
That's all I had.
Scott Whittemore, for the record. Thank you, Senator. And it's a stepped process where we're not. I don't want to give the impression we're replacing all of it all at once. It's equipment that over time becomes obsolete, and then new equipment has to be replaced. So it's just where it falls in the schedule.
Yeah. It just happens to fall all in that first and then a little bit in the second year. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a question around the financial solvency moving forward. I mean, does the agency believe that eliminating of these vacant positions and the transfer of the vacant IT professional will provide financial solvency beyond this budget? Or do you think further budget reductions will be necessary?
Senator, thank you very much, and Chair, thank you very much for the question. This is the crux of the matter for the TA. I will try and answer it as concisely as possible. We are fee funded, and the cuts that we're proposing to 36, it is my belief that this agency cannot cut further. We, in the last session, went from 54 positions to 39. This session, we're going from 39 to 36. Our three primary functions of permitting, vehicle inspection, and enforcement, I believe that the TA is at the bare bones in terms of a staffing level to get this job done and to protect the public. So it really becomes a question of revenues, because I do not believe we can cut our way to solvency. We last session, and you all, excuse me, let me be clear. You all, in a Senate bill 539, was a stepped increase to the medallion fee, and that was one effort where we jointly worked with the industry to increase fees and help create that long-term solvency. I think what we're looking at right now is a question of where do trips come back? If trips are around 14 million, then the TA will be year over year solvent. I think the problem becomes a forecast below that. And again, it's a crystal ball, right? Because we're fee funded and we're all looking at a forecast, it's very difficult to know where these trips are going to be long term. The discussions with the industry have been very, very positive. We've done these both privately, myself with the chair, or with members of the industry, but also in public. So we have a 5-member board that we discussed this, and they have been very forthright in their belief that the TA needs to be funded long term, and that they have stepped forward in each and every instance to say, how can we fund this best going forward? So in 2019, they supported the medallion fee increase with zero industry opposition. This time around, there have been discussions that the industry has been trying to generate a bill that would increase the trip charge. So our primary source of revenue is that trip charge. So those efforts are ongoing by the industry. We are doing our best in a collaborative way to meet them in any way. But obviously, we had to be very measured in this budget and just how things were proposed, given where the industry is. But I hope I'm answering your question in a sense to say that these cuts help, and they are necessary, and they do not hurt our ability to operate. I believe additional cuts to the Taxicab Authority will hurt our ability to operate, and it truly becomes a question of revenue. And given that the industry has signaled their interest in balancing our expenditures and our revenues, I would say that's a very positive indicator indeed.
So, Chair Brooks, let me also chime in. This is Terry Reynolds, Director. Really kudos to Administrator Whittemore, because he has really kind of rode the wave of this, downturn to be able to keep an effective organization. But really what we need to look at is we have an older platform of how we have developed our revenues to be able to support the agency. And we really need to look at a base to keep a base operation for the Taxicab Authority to make sure that they can meet the basic needs of service within the industry. And then as things grow, that they have revenues that they can use to add staff and be able to adjust in the industry to be able to meet the needs. So with that, we really need to take an overall look at what our revenue picture is and what we look at. We have a technology fee basically, and it's very narrow in terms of what it can be applied to. And we probably need to look at the expansion of our trip fees and be able to have a base for the industry. We thank you for what was done with medallions, but there needs to be a mixture of revenues coming into the authority to be able to maintain a basic platform to be able to operate. And I think that's the issue that Administrator Whittemore is looking at to be able to do that. So we've been doing a lot with a little, but there's a floor that we need to establish there to be able to keep this agency and keep the taxi cabs running within Las Vegas. So that's the issue what we're facing right now.
Thank you, Director Reynolds and Mr. Whittemore. Yeah, it's definitely, we can see from the budgets and the trends that something needs to be done for a sustainable operation. And I think you've identified some of the strategies moving forward. It looks like there's only a few levers to pull, and we need more rides. And I believe we all believe that's coming, but it looks like you have the trip fee and the tech fee, about the only two levers left to pull that are based on actual rides.
And Senator, thank you, if I may. On the technology fee, I think, Director Reynolds brings up an important point that there was a change to that language in 2017 in AB 487. And the language actually changed from must be used to implement technology improvements in safety, and it may. The language was actually changed in 2017 to be more discretionary. And so if the committee was looking for a way to perhaps broaden the revenue stream, if in fact you came to a decision that the technology fee should be broadened, I would say that the legislative history seems to indicate that trend in 2017, and it's something that the industry has talked about. And what's significant about the technology fee is the amount isn't set in NRS. It's actually set discretionarily by the board. And so if as a mechanism in between years, right, rather than every 2 years, trying to balance this, is that if the board were able to offset any challenges in the future by increasing that technology fee, that would be certainly one area. I think what the director's pointing out is in the past, an interpretation was that it was narrowly construed. And if this committee were to say the opposite, that in fact that technology fee could fund general operations. The legislative history seemed to indicate that.
Thank you, Mr. Whittemore. I think we have Mr. or Assemblyman Hafen has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Reynolds, and I just want to say thank you. One of the things that I had a question on was in relation to the bogus rides, and also tying into the other sources of revenue. Are you guys considering doing an increase to those fines to try to deter individuals? I know that would generate revenue when you catch them, but I just was curious if you guys are looking at increasing some of those fines and penalties for that.
Assemblyman, that is a great question. As we move away from what was historically one source of revenue on a fine structure related to long hauling, I think we wrote 3,000 plus citations from 2013 to 2020. That's what this agency was focused on. It was a bit of the, chasing the tail, a never-ending stream. And since we've instituted zones, we've been able to eliminate that. But then, of course, that raises a revenue question. And to your point, unlawful passenger transportation and our impound structure carries significant fines, thousands of dollars that we can levy against those individuals, and we do levy against those individuals. One of the challenges that we have is if you're dealing with somebody who's got a car that's worth less than the fine amount, it's because it's an administrative setting, we're setting those fines, and oftentimes as the impound is truly the collateral, if you will, to get that individual to pay, they're simply leaving that car in impound. And I want to be clear, this is not civil forfeiture. We are not selling the vehicle and keeping those proceeds. It is impounded by a third party, and if the person does not pay the fine and pick up the vehicle, then that impounder is selling the vehicle. But what you're finding is the penalty that we can assess just isn't being paid by many of these bad actors. Having said that, you would be absolutely blown away, or I'm absolutely blown away is a better way of saying it, how many times people walk in and pay $5,000 cash, $10,000 cash on a fine that was levied because they are doing this so often. We recently met with the FBI to discuss how significant this is, that we believe there's organized crime elements. We meet with Metro on a regular basis to discuss that organized crime elements, that for somebody to walk in here with $5,000 cash to pay a fine indicates a whole lot of potential criminal activity, whether it's prostitution or narcotics. And so this is something that we are leveraging our partnerships with Metro, with FBI, anyone that we can. But to your point, yes, the fines are significant. It is a source of revenue when they pay it.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Assemblyman Levitt, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question kind of just goes along with the line of questioning that has been asked so far. I just trying to understand. So when we're talking about DPS, do they have a separate budget outside of you to help enforce, or do they work strictly under your budget? I know that there's a dedicated law enforcement workforce that's out there that's going after limos, taxis, Uber drivers that are operating outside of their scope and outside of the regulations that you guys have in place. Are they on a separate budget item, or do they fall under you?
Thank you, Assemblyman. A great question. So we have 15 law enforcement staff. They are post-certified. They are Category 2 officers, along with the NTA has a very similar force. We work in a concurrent jurisdiction. Anytime one of those vehicles is operating without a CPCN, which is just saying it's not permitted. So whether it's a non-permitted limo, non-permitted bus, non-permitted shuttle, non-permitted taxi, non-permitted personal vehicle, both us and the Nevada Transportation Authority have concurrent jurisdiction. My 15 law enforcement officers are funded by this budget, just as the NTA's law enforcement officers are funded by their budget. We work together Their traditional licensee are limos, shuttles, buses, tow trucks. Our traditional licensee is taxis. But anytime you have this gray area where it's illegal, we both have jurisdiction, and that's why we work together.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'm trying to understand. So you're reducing your budget with the dispatcher and the vehicle inspectors for the graveyard shift, which I think we alluded to the fact that that's probably the busiest time for stuff happening, especially in Southern Nevada. So are you going to rely more on those law enforcement officers outside of your purview to kind of pick up the slack a little bit? Or and how are you with the minimal reduction in your budget, with that reduction in workforce, how are you going to reconcile your budget? Because it seems like if you lost half your budget in FY20, how are you going to reconcile your budget with the unsure future of how your revenue is going to react? It seems like you're not, and this is my minimal understanding of what I'm looking at. It doesn't seem like you're cutting enough to justify or to reconcile your books FY21. And so I just wondered how you were going to reconcile that, and if you were going to use the workforce that's outside of your purview to pick up the slack in that area.
Thank you, Assemblyman Scott Whittemore, for the record. So there's a lot there, and I'll try and answer all of it. What we're presenting here is a budget that's showing you our estimated reserve declining to 2.5 million by the end of fiscal year 21. That position may improve given the trips rebounding. A state agency having a reserve, it's really up to the money committees to decide how big that reserve is or how small that reserve is. What we're showing is a budget that is still projected to decline year over year, and that reserve projected to decline year over year because the revenues that are currently in place do not quite balance to expenditures based on a forecasted amount. If trips return to about 14 million, there's a good chance they may, then the Nevada Taxicab Authority is in the black, so to speak. If they are less than that, then that reserve is going to continue to be drawn down. So I think what the industry is recognizing, and kudos to them, I cannot thank them enough for coming to the table. What they're saying is let's find a long-term funding structure that gives more flexibility. And one proposal that they have is to increase the trip charge. Another proposal would be to increase the technology fee. Again, the director pointed out kind of the narrow reading in previously is to the technology fee. So yes, do we need more staff to work graveyard? There's no question. We have the staff in place to work 6 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week. We don't end on Friday. We work on a targeted basis after midnight. I think everybody on this committee recognizes the risk after midnight. This is something that the NTA wrestles with, something that we're going to continue to wrestle with. But the reality is just what can the industry bear? And so we wanted to be very measured in our approach since we are fee funded. And again, taxi cab rides have been impacted by rideshare. Their rideshare since 2015 has taken a bite out of that apple in every jurisdiction in America, and taxis have had to respond. So the reality is what can they bear? We need to be very careful. And they have come forward last session and this session saying we can bear a little bit more because the TA matters and in our enforcement matters. As to the other jurisdictions, yes, we will continue to meet with Metro and their traffic and their organized crime and their vice squads. We will continue to meet with the FBI or any other government agency and point out the significant risks. But funding long term, what we're pointing out here is a budget that is in a good place. We can afford these 36 staff members. They all have a job. And I'll tell you, from a perspective of recruitment and retention, when public workers, public servants in these roles feel that their job is not safe, they're concerned. And it's been my experience and it's been the director's experience to say, hold on, folks, your budget is in place. It's just going to take every biennium little tweaks. And that's what we've tried to do. So What we're looking at now and what we're discussing with the industry is what's the next little tweak that needs to be done.
So from what I understand, you're gonna reconcile it with reserves at this moment.
That is correct, sir. Is that over this past year, the drawdown was 2 million. It was significant. So thank God we had a reserve, because I don't know where we would be without it. Going forward, we have a reserve. It's just a question of what that drawdown is going to be over the next biennium, and can we get to the black on trips? But the answer is yes. We are funding partially forecasted with a partial drawdown of that reserve going forward, which is why the industry has stepped forward with a potential solution.
This is Terry Reynolds, Director. I wanted to point out too that in my other role, I work with the Department of Industrial Relations and our safety training consultation team on approving of events. And so we've been working with our large gathering event applications, and really they're picking up. We're looking at the World of Concrete coming back within the city. We're looking at everything from out-of-state volleyball tournaments coming in to conventions to the Electric Daisy Carnival. These are going to present challenges in terms of being able to work on that, but it's also going to increase the trip revenue, and we're seeing really that coming back, albeit slower, but it is coming back. And so we've approved almost 600 new events coming over the last several months that we're working on right now. And we have several in the queue that we're going over, so that are large events. We're working with Gaming Control, working with Southern Nevada Health, we're working with Clark County and the different local entities to be able to get these events going again. So I just wanted you to know that there is a lot in the pipeline that's happening within the community. It might not be visible right now, but we're seeing an uptick in that. And so we're hopeful that that will translate into more trips for our public transportation and revenues for our taxi authority and for the NTA also. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we have another question from Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. And Mr. Whitmore, I think you may have touched a little bit on the answer to my question. Going back to talking about rideshare versus taxis, how would an increase in the trip charge reflect in a total cost of rides in the taxi versus the rideshare? Will it put us out of that market that people will be more likely to use a rideshare versus a taxi?
Thank you, Scott Whittemore, for the record. Great question. The trip charge is a direct pass through to the customer. Having said that, the charges, fees, everything is set by the Taxicab Authority. So even if the trip charge or the technology fee were to increase, it does not increase vis-a-vis, what Uber or Lyft or rideshare is charging. So it doesn't price them out of the market because the fees and the amounts are set by the board, especially as it relates to the zones. So the zones are a flat fare. And for those of the members in Northern Nevada or outside Clark County, we instituted flat fare pricing from the airport to the strip and back. And that is the primary driver, no pun intended, of those trips is from the airport to and from the airport. And so the fact that it's a flat fare, it will not impact the total cost. And so it doesn't make it less attractive to the customer.
Thank you very much. It shows how often I go from the airport to the strip. I had no idea there was a flat fare, so thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I believe we have a question from Senator Dennis on the agency records management system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I misplaced my question. Thank you. Your IT transfer, you're transferring an IT position. And I guess actually the first question I wanted to ask is, you have 12 agencies that you're supporting with the IT folks. Is that right?
Senator Dennis, this is Terry Reynolds, Director for BNI. Down on our State Business Center, we have, we will have two with this one. We have one existing IT person that is located in Southern Nevada. This will give us two when we move the taxi one over. We also, if there are emergency circumstances, we can use Mr. Barry in the NTA to also assist. So basically, we will have two to support our Southern Nevada agencies. Now, we have a consolidated IT portion within the director's office, and we have additional people in the director's office that serve our agencies in the north, but they also can be assigned and work with online with our agencies in the south. So it's just not the having two people. We have the background of having the people in the north to be able to assist too. But this will give more flexibility to serve the state business center agencies that are down on Sahara Street, but they also can assist taxi, and with their knowledge base, it really benefits taxi instead of having one standalone person, because we have multiple skill sets to be able to help the agency, but they don't have to pay directly for that, so it helps them in their budget.
So how many users do you have in Las Vegas?
How many users do we have? We have about 2/3 of our employees in Las Vegas, so there's a little over 400 individuals in all of our agencies that have offices in Las Vegas. We have DIR, Industrial Relations. They have two IT people, one in the north and one in the south, and then they have a program person in the south that also works on workers' comp issues and the software for that. So as a standalone agency, they have their own IT people, but we are able, if we have to share those individuals around if we have the need in terms of installing software, working on server issues, communication issues, we can do that.
So every time I always look at state agencies when they do their tech support, I've seen in the past, you have a lot more resources now, but in the past it used to be that they were all up in the north and you had one down south, and the poor guy down south always had to, he had all these users to support. And so that was, as I looked at what you were doing here, I had some concerns that, the majority of your users are down south, but your tech support's up north. And so that's why I was asking about that. How would this transfer from the budget to the director's office impact implementation of phase 3 of your records management system?
Thank you, Senator Scott Whittemore, for the record. So phase 1 and 2 of the records management system has been fully implemented. And during that process, we relied heavily on what the director described was the expertise that exists within BNI's IT infrastructure. So there was multiple people who participated in that. Grant Reynolds, Pete, there's, KK, all these individuals who have come in at different points. And as the director points out, it's years and years of experience. And so as phase 3 has been pushed off, we are looking at deferring phase 3. It's just simply, it's a luxury at this point. We will come back to phase 3 when and if the budget allows for that. But phases 1 and 2 was really the backbone of updating us from a kind of 20th century all paper agency to now each and every one of our field investigators and inspectors has an iPad that is hooked into that records management system. They're generating either field citations or vehicle changes in the field, and they can print it from their car. So we've really joined the 21st century here. And as it relates to the third phase, I'm confident relying on BNI here in the south or BNI up north, even the way that IT functions. It's fairly seamless, and they can pour it into our systems. So we've received tremendous support from BNI in that regard.
So as far as phase three, do you have the funding to implement it? You just don't, at this point, have the people to be able to do it?
Thank you, Senator Scott Whittemore. For the record, we do have the funding for it, but it becomes a question of when is the right moment to implement it. It's really a customer-facing portal, so the idea would be that the industry could access it, send us documents, they could look up driver files. We talked about a driver permitting process in phase three. That's just not realistic to do. Because we require an FBI fingerprint, the law requires that their FBI fingerprint, as well as their local scope requires them to be in the building when we do those background investigations. So the reality is they can't do it online, unfortunately. The other side of that, the pro is that it's a very significant vetting, is that we know what their background is. So that phase three has shifted in what it is and what it will ultimately be. So as a portal to the licensees, as a customer-facing portal, I think it has value, but there's other things we need to fund in the meantime. That would be my suggestion.
So, but and in order to implement it, you'd have to transition back an IT professional in order to be able to do that?
I get yes, I'll answer that more directly. No, we wouldn't. The support structure that exists within BNI is more than enough to, in addition to the expertise we've gained on the ground, it's the same software as a service company that we've contracted with that will ultimately develop phase three. So we've developed a rapport with them. They know us. They're on site with us. If and when we need IT support, I'm confident we'll get it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Are there any other members of the committee that have any further questions for Taxicab Authority? Well, it appears as if we do not. So I really want to thank you, Mr. Whittemore, and thank you, Director Reynolds, for helping us understand some of these issues. And with that, we can move on to the next budget, which is the budget of the Office of the Labor Commissioner.
Yes, Shannon Chambers is our Labor Commissioner, and she will introduce our budget. This is the Office of Labor Commissioner is a general fund budget, and the general fund agencies within BNI took basically a 23% cut in that to make up for the goals that the Governor's Finance Office had for the cuts in the general fund. That translated into about $263,000 in cuts in the Office of Labor Commissioner. Really kind of a tough thing for them to absorb. But with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon Chambers to go through her budget. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Brooks, Madam Chair Peters, members of the committee. For the record, Shannon Chambers, Nevada Labor Commissioner. I have been the Nevada Labor Commissioner since 2014, and as Director Reynolds says, we are a general fund agency, so we adapt and modify and do things however we need to do them and to comply with the governor's directives and obviously with the legislative body. So I'll go through kind of what we do very quickly just in the interest of time, but we have a lot of major responsibilities. So we enforce private sector laws in private employment, minimum wage, overtime, breaks and lunches. We also enforce laws on deductions, employment practices, and the employment of minors. The other big side of our responsibility is public works projects, prevailing wage, and the Apprenticeship Utilization Act. So we issue public works project numbers, we calculate the prevailing wage, we enforce the Apprenticeship Utilization Act on public works projects, and then we also investigate violations and impose penalties, and in some cases, actual disqualification of contractors from working on public works projects. We also license private employment agencies, so those are known as your temporary staffing agencies. I will mention for the record, there is a bill out there, Senate Bill 55. The Labor Commissioner submitted a friendly amendment to bring the licensing of employee leasing agencies under the Labor Commissioner to kind of fit within the regulation of private employment agencies. So it seems to be a better fit. And that bill is currently moving along in the process. So just to give you some statistics, so since 2014, since I've been the labor commissioner, our claims and complaints go up. So as the economy gets better, our claims and complaints go up. And then when the economy contracts a little bit, similar to what's happened with the COVID-19 public health emergency, our claims still go up because a lot of individuals either get laid off or they get terminated. So those issues roll into potential labor claims and complaints for our office. So in the past 2 fiscal years, we've collected over $2 million for claimants. We've imposed over $400,000 in penalties. Those penalties go either directly to the claimant or in some cases to the general fund, depending upon how collectible they are. We also impose penalties on public works projects and prevailing wage claims. So we've imposed over $400,000 in penalties in the last 2 fiscal years. That goes directly to the general fund. So just this year alone, and I ran the numbers yesterday, just this fiscal year alone, we're up to over $300,000 in general, basically administrative penalties related to our general claims and complaints alone. Again, that's going straight to the general fund. We also, again, the licensing of private employment agencies. So on a given year, it's typically about 176 private employment agencies. So over the last 2 years, we've licensed 384. And then again, on the public works side, we've issued 1,573 public works project numbers. And the good news is that the COVID-19 public health emergency has not really impacted the public works side of things as a lot of people thought it would. Projects are still being built, schools are still being built, highways are still being built. So just want to bring some good news to the committee. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide with the budget enhancements that the labor commissioner is proposing for the next biennium. So obviously, as a general fund agency, as Director Reynolds said, we comply with the governor's directive and the governor's finance office directive and make the cuts that we need to make and make the modifications that we need to make. So in the decision unit E550, it is for workforce manager software. This relates directly to public works projects, prevailing wage, and the Apprenticeship Utilization Act. This proposal will give the labor commissioner software to drill down more into public works projects, to evaluate apprenticeship utilization, to review certified payroll reports, to provide regional assessments of what does the workforce look like in a given area on a public works project. So in 2019, and it was Chairman Brooks' bill, Senate Bill 232, authorized the labor commissioner to pass regulations to provide for electronic reporting of wages on public works projects. We have implemented that through a regulation package that was passed last year. So this workforce manager software will tie directly into that authority and also into the ability to monitor those projects. So going to actual positions, so decision unit E680, position eliminations. So we currently have a vacant administrative 2 position. So in year 1, that position would be left vacant. In year 2, we would be allowed to fill it at 25%. So turning to our administrative 3 position, which is currently vacant, we would leave that vacant in year 1 of the biennium, and then we would be able to fill it full-time in year 2. The final enhancement decision unit is E805. This would reclassify a vacant administrative 2 position to a compliance audit investigator 2 position. And just to give the committee some reference, so we currently have 9 investigators spread throughout the entire state of Nevada. That includes the chief investigator that does have to supervise and monitor the investigators. Of course, the labor commissioner and the deputy labor commissioner do that as well. But I can tell you caseload wise, 9 investigators with the different responsibilities that we have to enforce, the investigators do have a very large caseload. Now, I want to leave the committee with the assurance that we are managing that caseload. We implemented a online case tracking and case entry system in 2015 and 2017. So over 90% of our claims and complaints are being entered online. All the investigators have tablets so that they can go out in the field and can do things electronically. So as Director Reynolds said at the beginning, we've really adapted to the technology and really tried to implement very efficient processes because of the limited resources that the office does have. So I just want to thank the committee for allowing me to present kind of a quick overview of what we do and what our budget will be, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Chambers. I appreciate that. I think we might have a few questions here. I know I have some, and it goes to E680 and those positions. And, you know, I want to know how the existing vacancies of those two administrative assistant positions have impacted your ability to operate, and would that impact of the continued vacancies, what would the impact of the continued vacancies be if we approve them?
So thank you, Chairman Brooks, for the question. Again, Shannon Chambers, Nevada Labor Commissioner, for the record. So again, the basic answer is staff will have to do more. Existing staff will have to do more. That includes myself. So on the administrative side, it's the basic office functions of answering phones, customer service at the counter. Now, obviously with COVID, we're not doing that right now, but that'll come back at some point. It's case setup, just basic tasks. You know, it certainly will not help our office. And I'm going to be very, very honest. We're already running pretty lean as it is. So any reduction in positions will certainly have an impact. And obviously, as the commissioner, I'll do anything I can to try and lessen that impact, but it's likely going to have an impact.
Thank you, Commissioner. And along that same line of questioning around your wage claims, you currently have targeted to complete those record requests for wage claims in 90 days. Do you anticipate having sufficient resources to continue to do that? And how will this affect processing wage claims?
So Chairman Brooks, again, Shannon Chambers, for the record, thank you for the question. So we really are focused on keeping within that 90 days, and that means the deputy commissioner, that means the labor commissioner taking cases at this point. You know, if the workload continues to go up and the workforce continues to increase, that 90 days may get longer because staff will just be having to handle more and more of a caseload and more investigations. And, you know, there is a point where just there's not going to be enough investigators to handle all the cases that are coming in.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I believe I have a question from Assemblywoman Miller.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And my questions are along the same lines that the chair had, except for it's regarding the recommendation or the reclassification of the administrative assistant to the compliance audit investigator. And my first question is, would the position reclassification enable the agency to meet the increased workload?
So Chairman Brooks, permission to go directly to the Assemblywoman. Again, Shannon Chambers, Nevada Labor Commissioner. So it will absolutely help, Assemblywoman Miller. It will absolutely help. You know, I can tell you that since I've been the Labor Commissioner, every legislative session, there are definitely new responsibilities that get put on the Office of the Labor Commissioner. Last session alone, there were 2019 session, there were 13 bills alone that impacted the Office of the Labor Commissioner. So this will absolutely help, but I don't want to give you the assurance that it's going to solve everything.
Follow up, Chair.
Please do, Assemblywoman.
Okay, thank you. So then let me rephrase the question. Can you discuss what the plan is if the position reclassification is not approved? How would you then address the increased workload?
So again, Chairman Brooks, direct to Assemblywoman Miller, again, Shannon Chambers, Nevada Labor Commissioner, for the record, we would come up with a plan, Assemblywoman Miller, see how much more our current investigative staff could handle, look for other efficiencies. Certainly would have to address it. One of the things I've never wanted to do as the labor commissioner is to get behind. And to Chairman Brooks' point about we want to stick to the 90 days. People who are filing claims need to be paid. Those need to be addressed. So I would definitely come up with a plan for sure. But you know, our investigators now, they're averaging between 400 and 500 cases a fiscal year. That is a large caseload for an investigative staff. So again, we would address it, and we always do, but certainly having this reclassification will at least put us moving forward in the right direction to address the current workload and any future increased workload that we might have.
Could you tell us briefly what would be the ideal ratio for each person? You just mentioned 400 to 500 cases per year. What's the ideal ratio?
So again, Assemblywoman Miller, Shannon Chambers, for the record, Nevada Labor Commissioner. So ideally, 200 to 250 is ideal. That's still a lot. I'm not going to tell you it's not, but that would be ideal. You know, some of these cases too, it's not just as simple as a wage claim comes in, you contact the employer, the evidence is right there. Some of these cases are very complex and go longer than 90 days for various reasons. But, you know, there is truly an investigative process involved to all of these, a due process element. So we can't just speed that process along either.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Thank you for bringing up that question on the ideal ratio. That's an interesting concept. And we definitely have more volume coming up. I think that everything that we see is trending towards more public works projects, and we'll have plenty of work. I think next we have Assemblywoman Gorlow has a question.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. And I have a question regarding the labor certified payroll tracker compliance and workforce manager software systems. How do those systems assist the division in managing the workload with the recommended staffing levels for the upcoming biennium?
So Chairman Brooks, direct permission to go to Assemblywoman Gorlow. Again, Shannon Chambers, for the record, Nevada Labor Commissioner. So the electronic ability to view certified payroll reports and to capture that data in those reports will eliminate some of the manual steps that we have to do now. So that will absolutely free up staff to potentially take on other investigations and other assignments. But right now, some of that is done manually and it's not efficient. And it's not a good use of time. So allowing staff to be out in the field to actually see that information on a tablet directly electronically will make those investigations much more efficient.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Thank you, Commissioner, for the answer. Do any of the committee members have any further questions for the Labor Commissioner or the Office of the Labor Commissioner? And again, I apologize as I try to scroll through multiple screens. All right, well, it does not appear as if we do. And so I really thank you, Commissioner Chambers, for coming in this morning and helping us understand your budget. And we will move on to the next budget then.
All right, thank you, Chairman Brooks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. Our next budget is the Financial Institutions Division with our Commissioner, Sandy O'Laughlin. This is, Sandy has been with us now for about 1.5 years, and probably if she'd known what was facing her when she came into to BNI, she probably would have run out the door. But she has stuck with us and done an incredible job over the last year and a half for us as we have moved through the pandemic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thank you, Director Reynolds. Good morning, Chair Brooks and committee members. For the record, my name is Sandy O'Loughlin. I'm the Commissioner for the Financial Institutions Division. Thank you for the opportunity to present a brief summary of the Financial Institutions Division fiscal year 2022 and 2023 budget for our main revenue budget account 3835. We license, regulate, and examine approximately 1,385 financial institutions and businesses under Chapter 13, under 13 statutes, with a staffing level of 37 FTEs. 31 of those FTEs focus solely on examinations. My division is a self-funded agency, and the revenue generated from this budget account is from the examinations we conduct, depository assessments, and licensing fees. Besides examinations, the division is responsible for processing and responding to written consumer complaints, as well as investigating possible violations of state law and unlicensed activity. We promote growth in the financial sector for both Northern and Southern Nevada. This slide details the license types, and the current number of licensees. We conduct examinations on an annual basis for the majority of our licensees. However, due to examination ratings, we may have to conduct follow-up throughout the year. Next slide. The first of 3 budget enhancements is for the migration from our current legacy system to the nationwide multi-state licensing system being utilized by all 50 states. The system is a one-time migration cost and is approximately $41,500. The second enhancement for Nevada depository growth, which will require an additional staff of 3 FTE. Our primary savings bank charter is Charles Schwab Trust Bank. As an example of growth, in 2018, their total assets were $390,022,000. Comparably, December 31st of 2020, the total assets were $12,474,000,000. We also have a 5-year equipment replacement budget for approximately $45,782 in the second year. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee that I can. I'll do my best.
Thank you. Sorry about that. My mute is malfunctioning. I think we do have a question or a few questions from Assemblywoman Peters.
Chair, and thank you for the presentation on the budget. Can you explain how the division determined the need for those 3 additional full-time positions?
As I said, it is primarily for the Charles Schwab Trust Bank. When the savings bank was enhanced or recreated, we did it so that the Charles Schwab Group could come in and open a savings bank. And as I said in the beginning, we didn't know how much staff or at the time that commissioner didn't know how much FTE was going to be required. But they did go from 390 million that first year in 2018 to December of last year at the same time period of $12,474,000,000. That's a lot of assets and for us as a division to examine. So their level is at a level that we need to bring on staffing to ensure that we're protecting Nevada.
This is Terry Reynolds. I wanted to add into that, if I could, Chair Brooks. The other thing I think is important is that Charles Schwab, through their assessment, will be paying enough to support those positions. So, and they are very aware of that. FDIC actually has a investigator embedded in the Henderson office that does continual evaluation examinations for Charles Schwab. And so we would work with the FDIC in the Henderson location to be able to have a level of examinations required by federal law to concurrently to support their operations. So in addition to that, you will have a bill before you that will help actually modernize and put us in sync with the national laws for trusts and savings. And that will also support Charles Schwab coming in with their IRA trust accounts, which will be in the neighborhood of up to $1 trillion. So that will also help support these additional positions. So, we're looking at growth in this area where a lot of areas they're contracting, but in the banking area, Nevada had only up to go because we lost 50% of our banks during the recession. And we're now seeing with the modernization of our banking laws within Nevada and the national laws that are being revamped, we're seeing more banks want to come back into Nevada. So that's a very positive sign. And we have to staff for that. So Commissioner O'Loughlin is getting positioned so that we can do that and support those banks as they come into Nevada.
Thank you for that explanation. Can you just dive into a little bit more the completion? I'm sorry. Like the efforts of those positions and how adding those 3 positions would help you meet like the timeliness of these examinations and the efficiency of those examinations. Just describe a little bit more about how maybe what it looks like today and then what it would look like with those 3 additional positions.
Well, for the record, this is Sandy O'Loughlin. Currently, there's a lot of work that goes into that particular organization for exams, and it is constant monitoring. They are at a size that we have to look at them monthly. I would like to do a deeper look. The word deeper is absolutely appropriate. To really, we're not doing as much as we should or we could, and so as they're getting larger, we need to go deeper. We need to look at more accounts, and so our scope is smaller just in order to get it done. We have right now 1 examiner that is our expert in trusts, and every month we have to review their examination reports from their external auditors. We have to do a quarterly review in their institution. It requires a lot of time, and we don't have the resources to do it thoroughly as we should. And they're going to continue to grow, and we are not pacing with them. We need to pace with them as they grow. We really need to grow.
Thank you. I'm in my head trying to like understand the quantifications, right? Is what you're seeing in the growth being matched with the application of these new FTEs. It sounds like you guys are in a phase of figuring out what that should look like, given what has historically been put towards the effort and what you're attempting this time. So I'd just be curious as we come around to the next biennium, how this effort has worked out and whether you are able to quantify that a little more. And I have one final question, if I may, Chair. Can you discuss the training requirements for those financial institution examiner staff and what the time frame for them to be trained looks like? Within the next biennium as they're hired.
Sandy O'Loughlin for the record. The training is intense. There's no easier way to say it. It's quite intense. We start them out in the division on the non-depository side. That allows them to understand the state, and being new to the state, that's a job unto itself. And so they learn about the regulations and the statutes and how it all flows, how to work within our systems. After a year's of being in the non-depository type, and we have fast-tracked a couple of people into the depository area, it takes no less than 4 years. That is that is just what it is, to get through all of the FDIC training, as well as all of the federal regulations. There's constant education and recertifications. And so for them to actually be what we call an EIC, which is an examiner in charge, which I want all the depository team to actually get there at some point, that is a process. And they're really, unless you come out of college and have done, 100 studies on banking and banking exams, there's just no way of doing it without actual practical application, working with the FDIC, working with the NCUA, and working with the Federal Reserve Bank. It's a process. It's just a process. I hope that helped.
Yeah, so timeline wise, do you mind breaking it down for me? So were these folks, we're looking to get them hired by like October 21?
I would like to have them hired tomorrow.
Okay, so before that. And then that training, when do we expect them to be able to start doing the examinations after the training starts?
So what should happen, the way it would work would be to identify people within our division that could hopefully move up and along the way a little easier. And then the new people would start at the lower level, and we educate them up as they migrate to the positions we need them to be. It is very difficult to just hire somebody off the street to take one of those positions out of the chute. It takes I would love to just take a retired FDIC person, because that's about the level that it would take. So if you know anybody, I'm fully available. But we do look for that type of individual. And if we can't get that type of individual, then we find the talent. There's always a shining star, and we will focus on that person and give them what we need to get them educated. Right now, it's a little difficult because they can't, usually the training is in Virginia, and we can't get them anywhere. We're trying to do it virtually. They limit the classes. And for where we're at now, we need the availability of the bodies in order to take the training. And so we're just at one of those moments where the growth is getting bigger, and we just need to start moving towards that.
Great. Thank you so much for the responses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Laughlin. I think we have another question from Assemblywoman Miller, and possibly from Senator Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, so how will the migration to the nationwide licensing system impact staff workload?
That's a very good question. Sandy O'Loughlin for the record. The NMLS, and it's not the mortgage system, the nationwide multi-state system,
yes,
is used for the licensing in order for them to expedite getting the funds to us, getting their documents to us to license. I'm not as familiar with the system. I know we have other divisions that use it. It would be beneficial for us to be on it, because we can use the information from the other 50 states that are using it, which will help us in determining licensing, that we don't have to recreate a lot of those wheels. It just, the information is there, and we can assess it. Does that help?
Okay. It does. Thank you. My next question is, when it comes to the transaction or service fees associated with the credit card payments, is this something the private sector licensees will be responsible for, or who's covering that?
Sandy O'Loughlin for the record. It's my understanding, and I don't want to fib, so it's my understanding that we pay the initial $47,000, and then we pass those charges on we don't pass the charges on. As the companies sign into the NMLS, they pay when they are set up with the NMLS, which likely they are in some other states as well.
Okay, so essentially the agency will pay it up front, but then be reimbursed because you're saying that those charges will also be applied to their overall fee?
No. Sandy O'Loughlin for the record. I'm sorry if I didn't.
No, that's fine.
It's my understanding that it is a fee that we pay. It's just a one-time. Oh, thank goodness. Deputy Commissioner Mary Young is here. She's trying to assist me. It is our fees.
They're just paying the private sector.
Oh, okay. So the business owners are paying the fee to the NMLS system. We are just paying for the one-time migration fee.
Okay, so that's just a one-time migration.
Yeah, that's it, just once.
One time. Oh, great. Okay, so, and then they just cover their own fees going forward.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you. No, that's fine. And that's why we, always happy to have people that can assist with, and they're welcome to come on camera too. So, but thank you so much. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Miller. Senator Dennis, I think, has a follow-up to that.
I do. So is there going to be a financial impact to the licensees by switching over to this new system?
It's my understanding, Sandy O'Loughlin for the record, it's my understanding that is a minimal charge.
Do we know what that is?
I'm bringing Mary in for the assist.
Thank you for the question, Senator. This is Mary Young, Deputy Commissioner. From the cost now is a very minimal cost. It's $100 for renewal, and it's $30 per branch to renew. So from what NMLS has told us is that it's actually a cost saving for all licensees because they can renew in all 50 states at once. So they save on postage and time. So it's a very minimal cost.
So are you saying, and how often is that? You said $100 plus then $30 for each branch. Is that, how often is that done?
Annually. It's annually renewal.
So each licensee would pay $100 for the first one, and then if they have additional branches, would be $30.
Correct. And then the credit card processing fees.
Right. Okay. So I wanted to follow up. So your current system, the Versa system, you've had that in for 10 years now?
Approximately, yes. Since we went live 2010.
So and that they've decided not to upgrade it anymore and do any more functionality. Is that accurate?
Mary Young, for the record, that is correct. The NMLS system will not just offer licensing, but it will also offer an examination module and a complaint module. So that is currently what we have at Versa. We have the examination, licensing, and complaint, and that's what we'll also get with the NMLS system. So it will streamline the whole process for our licensees as well as the division.
Right. So then, and the other system, the NMLS system has been around for 8 years. Is that right?
I believe so. Yes. The examination and the complaint module are newer. They just became live, I believe, last year in 2020.
So you're feeling comfortable that because so many different states are using it, that it's not just gonna get, like the other one where they just stop supporting it?
Mary Young, for the record, no, we have every faith that it will be around for a long time. It is backed by CSBS, which is the Conference of State Banking Systems, and they back that system. Our sister division, Mortgage Lending Division, currently uses it for mortgages. They have for a very long time. And again, all 50 states are still using it.
And are you going to be porting your data over from the old system to the new system?
Mary Young, for the record, that is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dennis, and thank you, Ms. O'Loughlin and team for the answers. I appreciate that. Do any of the members have any further questions for the team that's presenting here on this budget today? It does not appear as if we do, so thank you very much, Ms. O'Loughlin, for walking us through the Division of Financial Institutions budget, and I appreciate all that you're doing for the state, and we will move to the next, last, and final budget. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. This is Terry Reynolds, Director, for the record. Kathy Sheehy is our Mortgage Lending Commissioner, and as you can see on this first slide, her area is a growing area, and as you know, the real estate business in Nevada has really been very active over the last several years. Has come back. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy Sheehy, our Mortgage Lending Commissioner. Thank you.
It is my privilege to present to you a brief summary of the Mortgage Lending Division fiscal year 22 and 23 budget for budget account 3910. The Mortgage Lending Division has experienced, as everyone has in Nevada, unprecedented times. Many new challenges were introduced, new process to align with the new telecommuting world that we're operating in, and just figuring out how to navigate the new virus. I am appreciative to say that we have endured all of this and we are ready for the future. At the top of this slide is our mission statement. I'm not going to read it, but it's there, as everything that we do from licensing, examination, and enforcement all tied to this statement. On the left is our statutory mandate, which includes 645A, that covers escrow agencies and their escrow agents. 645 that cover the mortgage companies and the mortgage loan originators. 645F, the covered service providers and the mortgage servicers. And note 645F was added during the 2017 legislature under AB 480. And 598 is a registration only with the division. On the right, you can see the current numbers of licensees that we have, comparing from the last biennium to the current. As the Director Reynolds indicated, you can see, ironically, in this industry, the growth has been seen in the number of companies, mortgage companies, loan originators, and servicers. And we've seen just a very slight decrease in the escrow agency and the agents. On the next and last slide, it shows the submitted budget amount for the next biennium and the 2 decision units we have that are requests. That is the end of the presentation, and we are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sheehy. I appreciate that. We do have a question from Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation on this budget. I have a question, and maybe a series of questions, but I'm going to start with one related to your reserve amounts, which are relatively healthy considering where other people's reserve or other budget reserves have been so far this session. I do see in my notes that you guys have reduced the licensing fees, but continue to increase that reserve level. So I'm just wondering what kind of thoughts you've put towards maybe restructuring the fees or some other option for addressing that increase in reserves.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Peters. So we did try to address this in the last legislative session. So we looked at restructuring the fees, and we reduced the new mortgage loan originator application fee from $185 down to $145, and that was about a 28% reduction. And on the renewals for the same mortgage loan originator license, we reduced it from $165 to $135, which was about a 22% reduction. So the plan was to come to the body this budget session and share with you the reduction, but instead I'm here to say that because of the unprecedented times, the historical low mortgage rates, and I think the movement with telecommuting, people are moving away from the location that they were in, because now being able to telecommute, they can virtually move anywhere as long as they have internet service. And so we've seen an influx of individuals moving out of state, and even from local downtown areas to the suburbs to buy homes, refinance homes. So that has just shown in the increase in the number of licenses that we have for the mortgage company and the mortgage loan originators. And I think a little bit of it also maybe those individuals that left the industry over the years, maybe during better times, are now coming back to this industry. So again, instead of a reduction in the reserves, I'll end up showing an increase just because we've had this kind of unique increase in our numbers.
Well, we absolutely don't want to undercut your fee structure in the event that the market goes back to historic rates or we see a dip in that in those numbers. But I am wondering, about how those fees can be spent, what their limitation is in statute, how, what kind of activities can you fund using those fees, or is it strictly for the licensing efforts of your division?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Peters. Again, the revenue that we generate from the licensing, because we are 100% fee-based division, that we do not have any funds or revenue from the general fund. So we pay for the licensing unit, which is housed under the director's office of BNI. And then we cover examinations of the companies that have the licenses with us. And then we also fund the enforcement side, where we received, I believe it was approximately 221 complaints last year. And so that income, that revenue will pay for the investigators to answer the complaints, address the complaints, and if necessary, take regulatory action against these companies or individuals that may not be in compliance. So the fund that and the fees that we collect from the licensing will pay for all of these functions that we perform.
Thank you for the responses.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters, for the question. Thank you for the response, Ms. Sheehy. Are there any other members that have any questions for this budget? Well, I do not see any. No one has raised their hand to ask a question here. And so I think that is it for this budget. I appreciate you walking us through it, Sheehy and Mr. Reynolds. I think that is the last budget for the day. And if any of the members have any questions for Mr. Reynolds on any of the budgets that we heard today. If not, I believe that we are through with our agenda this morning. So thank you very much, Mr. Reynolds, Director Reynolds, for presenting all of those budgets and for your team for what you do and for informing us this morning.
Thank you, Senator Brooks and members of the committee. We really appreciate this opportunity and the questions that you gave us to address our budgets. These are very specific areas, and some are very complex. And so we really appreciate giving us the time to go through these and the questions to really take out the issues that we have within these areas. So once again, thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you. And so that brings us to our final agenda item, which is public comment. And if broadcast services could make sure the public comment lines are open, and let's wait a few minutes to see if anyone is on there or wants to join.
Thank you, Chair. One moment, please. Caller with the last three digits of 837. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
This is Kent Ervin, K-E-N-T-E-R-V-I-N, representing the Nevada Faculty Alliance, the independent association of NC faculty statewide. Good morning, Chair Brooks, Chair Peters, and subcommittee members. You held a budget hearing for the Public Employees Benefits Program, PEB, on February 10th. In a repeat of the Great Recession, healthcare benefits for state employees are being slashed to fill a revenue shortfall this time in the middle of a pandemic when many employees have serious health issues. The PEB board meets on March 25th to set rates, incorporating the cuts in GovRec. Maximum out-of-pocket expenses on the high deductible plan, the base plan, will increase by over 50% to $13,000 for a family in a year. The long-term disability insurance benefit will be eliminated entirely. The life insurance benefit will be cut in half, and contributions to Medicare retiree HRAs will be reduced by 15%. These all affect the most vulnerable employees, the sickest whose expenses exceed the out-of-pocket maximums, those who become disabled after July 1st of this year, and retirees on fixed incomes. Unless the legislature acts very soon, PEB must proceed with these changes. The PEB board will set new rates incorporating the cuts on March 25th, and preparations begin the next day for open enrollment starting May 1st. Fortunately, the American Rescue Plan signed into law last week will deliver $2.95 billion with a B, to state coffers to address just such pandemic-related issues, either directly or by covering other budget shortfalls. We implore you to make the necessary planning and budget decisions as soon as possible to avoid the worst of the PEB cuts to state employees. It appears already to be too late to change the plan design and the drastic increases in out-of-pocket costs, but you can still reinstate long-term disability at a cost of about $3.15 million per year. You can restore the Medicare HRA contributions at $3.4 million per year, and you can possibly restore employee premiums to pre-pandemic levels at about $14 million per year. To be clear, the elimination of long-term disability means that current active and state employees who become disabled after July 1st and can no longer work will have no income replacement safety net, because we do not participate in Social Security disability. Like any insurance policy, coverage ends once payments are no longer made, so this does not just apply to future hires. Thank you for all your hard work and difficult decision-making. I will submit more detailed information to the committee in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. The public line is open and working. However, there are no additional callers at this time.
Well, thank you. So that is our last agenda item. And with that, we will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Chair.